Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining this short webinar on messaging environmental behaviors in the time of COVID-19. This is a confusing time all around, and I know it raises a lot of questions about what we can or can't continue doing in moving our environmental and conservation movements forward during this time. So I wanted to take this time to share some thoughts, ideas, and inspirations for how we can continue to be relevant and heard during this time while also being empathetic and appropriate in light of the fact that there is a global pandemic happening. I'm going to start by talking about what we can do in the here and now, and then following this up with what we can prepare for moving forward in the what's next phase. So while we're in the middle of this pandemic right now, it's really important to understand where people are at, where our audiences are at right now. And what's interesting is many folks really around the entire world are experiencing very similar things. There's very few times in our lifespans when we've had a situation like this. Certainly, it is context specific, and the degrees to which individuals are feeling these things does vary quite a lot. But in general, across the world, we're seeing audiences and people struggling and dealing with these kinds of things at this present moment. They're juggling a lot of change. Folks have been working from home when they haven't before, and you have the entire family all together at the same time. This even has changes like the fact that we're feeding an entire family 3 meals a day, when typically at least lunch is everyone on their own. Our regular routines have been disrupted. We've had to, on the fly, create brand new routines and try to get to a place that's as normal as possible, even given how non-normal the situation is. And everyone's wearing multiple hats, more hats than before, where we have much less clear lines between when we have a work hat on, a parenting hat, a spouse hat, a friend hat. So we're wearing many of those hats much more throughout the day, sometimes multiple at the same time. Everyone is coping with a much higher level of fear, anxiety, and uncertainty than they have before. And this comes from financial security, job stability, concerns around our own health, around our family, and these have just really been exacerbated in this time. When we typically think about the hierarchy of needs and the goal to reach the top of that triangle of self-actualization, the reality is that all of us have really been bumped down a few levels, where some of those foundational levels of health, security, and safety have become much more at the forefront than they were before. So just understanding that everyone around the world is coping with a certain level of anxiety and uncertainty that they are not used to dealing with. And this is really every day throughout the day. And as you also know, it's quite exhausting. And through all of this, folks are looking to have distractions, some sense of positivity and optimism, looking for connection as most of us are self-isolated, and very much looking for things to do. As this goes on as well, we're getting a little bit of cabin fever, as you may be experiencing yourself. So what can we do during this time, given that this is the context that most of our audiences are in right now? Well, the best way to be relevant in the here and now is to be helpful as possible. And I have 3 ideas of categories of ways that we can be helpful in the environmental and conservation and climate space. First one is, since people are itching for things to do, can we share activities and share resources to help them do things that are nature related, that are conservation related? Things like gardening ideas. In many parts of the world, the weather is beginning to warm up. It's a great time for folks to get out into their garden, which is still appropriate to do given the pandemic regulations and recommendations. What a great time to talk about native plant species, removing invasive species from your property, ways to even build like a bee house to help the pollinators in the area. Ideas for reusing and upcycling household items. People don't want to shop as often, so they are looking at the things in their house and saying, Can I do something with this? Can this become a game? Can it become multi-purpose tool? What can I do with this stuff so I don't have to throw it out? This could be a really interesting time to introduce ideas and resources for reusing and upcycling items. And for any of your audiences that are families with kids, that could even be a playful thing, as opposed to something that has a super long shelf life. And backyard and outdoor nature activities can we use as an opportunity to explore nature in maybe some places that we typically overlook or take for granted, and bringing that back to life a bit more. And this is a great example at the bottom, and actually an app that you can use in your backyard to identify different types of species, flora and fauna that are in your backyard. The second category is focus on food and energy. This is actually an opportunity now where we can help build some new and better behaviors in a way that's very appropriate given the context that we're all in right now. How can we help our audiences reduce food waste, grow their own food, and even stretch food further? Again, people don't really want to be shopping as often as they used to. And so they are looking at the things they have in their house now and saying, how can I help this work harder for me? How can this food go further? How can I avoid wasting the food that I did go out to get? So ideas on how we can pickle kale stems or grow green onions into a new batch of green onions at home. These are behaviors we've wanted to encourage for a while around food use. And this is a really good opportunity to bring that to the forefront now in a very helpful, resourceful way. In addition to how can we keep our produce and herbs fresh for longer in the refrigerator. Composting and recycling behaviors can emerge now as well as people are home for longer. They're not rushing out the door to the next thing. So we can take this time and talk about what recycling looks like in their area and how they can even improve recycling at home. And lastly, while energy use has gone down in a lot of places, it is going up in our homes. And nobody really wants to be faced with a higher electricity bill during this time. So how can we help our audiences conserve energy while at home, knowing that everyone's at home now, everyone's online? What are the tips for still reducing consumption in that context? These are things that will move our movements forward while also being really, really helpful for our audiences that are struggling with some of these things for the first time. And lastly, in a fun way, can we provide an escape? This is a great way of creating a stronger connection to and affinity for nature. And it really comes in bringing nature to people if people can't get out into nature. Feel-good images of nature and animals, videos or VR or AR experiences that transport them to another place, nature sounds that calm us and have us appreciate the sound of birds and other animals around us, and even downloadable Zoom backgrounds as everyone is on Zoom right now. And this example here comes from Shed Aquarium, where they did some great online social media videos of seeing their penguins explore the aquarium with no one else around. Now, these might seem like, oh, they're just kind of fun surface level things, but people are hungry for this and they love this kind of escape, that it creates a stronger bond to nature when we're not, again, rushing to a bunch of different places. So how can we bring nature back into people's forefront of their mind, top of the radar, and begin to really recreate that bond that we so naturally have with our environment? Now with this, there are some things that I would recommend avoiding doing during this time. Any words without actions, these kind of empty, we're here for you messages, or quote unquote, in these uncertain times. We're seeing this on TV right now, and frankly, all of us are a bit sick of it. We don't just want words, we want to hear actions and updates. So if you as an organization or agency have important updates to share, like operating hours, things that are getting canceled, yes, communicate that. And talk about some of the things maybe you are doing now that helps with the pandemic, helps local communities, help protect animals. It's okay to share what you're doing, but avoid this sort of empty words only sort of approach. Avoid adding to existing fear and anxiety. That's not helpful right now. People are already experiencing their heightened fear, heightened uncertainty, and they don't need anybody else adding to that. So this is not the time to capitalize on fear. And with that, that means also not kind of wagging our finger and saying, we told you so, and this is what climate change will do to us. This is not the time to make people feel bad about that. We can turn this around and say, these are steps we can take to avoid future big issues like this happening. That's fine. That's solution oriented. It's talking about things we can do. It's empowering. But I would avoid doing anything now that says, ha, we told you so. And now still may not be the right time to be asking for donations on a regular basis or a consistent basis. There will be a time for that. We're probably not far away from that time. But right now it feels a little bit tone deaf if we're only talking about programs that are not coronavirus related or haven't been directly affected by coronavirus. So now let's look at what's coming next. So certainly it's hard to know. We don't really know how long this is going to last, and we're seeing some countries, some states, some counties starting the process of opening up. And even there, we're not totally sure what next looks like and what it will entail and what it will bring. Now, with that being said, there are some things that are good to keep on our radar and keep our eyes out for so that we can quickly prepare for what's next and not just let that time pass us by without being ready to potentially move our conservation and environmental movements forward during that time. Now, some insights that we have been learning through this experience can help guide us in terms of getting prepared for what's next. And there's some audience insights. For example, pro-social behavior does exist. So the I'm willing to take an action on behalf of my community is there. But it's not necessarily without some personal benefits. So we might be staying home to save lives, but we're also staying home to protect ourselves. And those two things can exist at the same time. One is a personal benefit, one is a pro-social benefit. So it's important to know pro-social behavior does exist, but we might need to add a personal benefit to it when we're talking about environmental and conservation behaviors. Collectively as a society, we're learning how individual actions add up to a collective impact. And this is great for us. We've been trying to communicate this for a long time and have dealt with some skepticism around individual actions for environmental impact. Like that question that sometimes we get of, what does it matter if I use a plastic straw? I'm just one person. But as a society, we're seeing the importance of these individual actions. That's a message we can continue to move forward in our messages and our causes. The fact that each individual does matter and it does add up to something bigger. Our health is hugely important to us. It drives actions and behaviors. And it's something for us to consider in environmental and conservation messages. Where does health play a role here? And does it play a potentially bigger role than, saving the planet, and something that we can connect to a bit more, since we are seeing it does really produce action quite quickly. Reactance effect should be anticipated. Reactance effect happens when someone just naturally, instinctually fights back from being told what to do. And it's that part of us that says, you can't tell me if I can go outside or not go outside, and you can't tell me to wear a mask or stand 6 feet away. So we're seeing some of that now. And that should be anticipated also in our conservation messages too. People don't really like being told what to do. While that's true, we can also anticipate that will decrease over time as social norms take hold. As people start to see their family and other peers doing the behavior, then they're less likely to fight back against it, because they'd rather then conform to their social circle and feel less inclined to sort of fight the man, so to speak. We're also seeing some larger social shifts happening. Some of this has been exacerbated through the global pandemic, and some of these will also be very context specific based on where you live and where your audiences live. We're going to see some version of these shifts everywhere in the world that show us what might be coming next. So we're connecting more and more with the value of and the need for local community. We've been thrust in the world of globalization for so long that now finally, because we're back home and really locked in our homes, we're seeing the importance and the role of local community. We're seeing more and more community-based groups pop up on places like Facebook, apps like Nextdoor, and folks saying, how are my neighbors doing? Are they okay? We're also focused much more on local businesses and buying locally. And this can be a really great shift that we can work with when we want to encourage more local mobilization around events or local mobilization around region-specific actions and behaviors related to the environment. This will really work in our benefit. We're also seeing the adoption of several trends being sped up. Things like remote work, a trend that's already been starting, especially by millennials and other generations. The home as headquarters. Virtual conferences. We've seen more conferences go virtual in the last 6 months than we ever have. Not even 6 months, 2 months. Purpose-led business. This is where we see those corporations who are really walking the walk and not just talking the talk. And that's leading to much stronger conscious consumerism and even calling out of those brands that aren't doing the right thing. These were trends that already existed, and we're really seeing them get sped up now as there's sort of a concentration around these activities. More people are looking to scientists for the truths. Now, I'm kind of crossing my fingers here that this is something that will stand the test of time and won't just be here around Dr. Fauci, but we are seeing more and more people say, I need to go right to the source. And the folks that know best in this case are the scientists. And I'm going to stay really hopeful that this is something that we can carry forth in our work, especially around the climate issues. And lastly, we're having more of a wake-up call on the role of local and national government. We have seen over the last few years a declining amount of trust in government. And a perception of trust and reliability is one thing. When it really comes to a head, as it has for most of our countries now, it's a much bigger thing than just perception of trust. It's a matter of who's actually taking care of us and what is the role of government? When are they stepping up and doing the right thing? And when aren't they? Now, if your work around climate, conservation, and environment involves a certain level of advocacy and regulation work and policy work, this can work in your favor as well. This is a time to say, this is a role that government needs to play, and we need your help pushing them to do that. Because more and more people are going to say, yes, I agree, and I'm willing to take that extra effort because I now see and really believe that government needs to play a role here. Now, in terms of rebuilding normalcy, and again, I don't know what normal is going to look like. Very few of us do know what normal is going to look like from here. But is there a possibility, an opportunity for us to help rebuild normalcy, rebuild what's next with sustainability in mind? And I have a few ideas I want to share here for what that could look like. And I'm sure this is not an exhaustive list. I want to use it as a thought starter so you too can begin to think about how can we introduce sustainability when we're looking at the next phase of resuming normalcy or resuming outdoor life. How can we embed some of these values and concepts and actions and behaviors for that time? So the first category here is, can we encourage commitments for collective impact? Have I covered this before? We are seeing how our individual impacts, our individual actions add up to a collective impact. How can we talk about this now in the environmental landscape? What are those individual actions we'd like to encourage them to do, and talk about how that adds up to something bigger? And does that then give us an opportunity to encourage commitments to reduce our individual footprint? For example, we can show the impact that we've had for the fact that we've all been home for a month and how that has reduced our global footprint. And therefore, can you make a commitment to do one less activity moving forward? One less car ride, one less flight, one less conference. And the willingness to make that commitment now as we are getting back to normal is really that prime time to be doing that. And don't forget the personal benefits. What's in it for them? Maybe remembering that time they had at home and how precious that was. Maybe the working from home is a lot easier. Being remote, you can still get stuff done. Health benefits. What can we tap into so it's both pro-social and personal? And focus on prevention, flatten the curve. So instead of saying, this is what climate change will do to us, I told you so, how can we say, these are steps we can start to take today to prevent something worse happening in the future? That's something that's really going to resonate with people as we move into the what's next phase. Can we use this time to reinforce our connection to nature? Right? If we bring nature to people, we'll have an appreciation of it. We'll be missing it. We'll be, distance makes the heart grow fonder, I think is the expression. So tap into the fact that we've so enjoyed having nature brought to us and being able to experience it virtually, that we can tap into that to encourage a level of advocacy so that we can continue to protect nature, continue to have it there for us as a tool that helps calm us, relax us, give us happiness. So how can we use that and invite audiences to experience, protect, and advocate for nature, such an important aspect of our lives, by reminding them of the joy and value it brings to us? In some ways, it's almost like returning the favor. And lastly, back to personal health, can we show those links? Even folks who are climate skeptics still believe that reducing air, water, and soil pollution is hugely important because they feel that's going to affect them personally, their health and their well-being, and they're right. So how can we talk about that as a mechanism for encouraging those individual and collective actions? This may be a time where we want to talk about physical distancing between humans and wild animals. I'm already seeing some of those messages come up as we get back to what normal may look like. And keeping humans healthy may be that lead into behaviors. And it may not be the planet. And us growing more comfortable with leading in with benefits that are more meaningful to our audiences than necessarily what's meaningful to us will get us a lot further. So think about, what are humans worried about? How does this impact their health? And can that be a lead into behavior? And there's other benefits as well beyond health that we can look at. So throughout all of this, we are learning some tips and lessons on how to message behaviors through the coronavirus experience that I think we can carry with us and learn from in terms of how we message environmental and conservation behaviors. The first one is, it's so critical to demonstrate the desired behavior on all fronts, everywhere where people look. If we're talking about physical distancing, then we should show what that looks like at every chance we get. As a herd species, we do like to mirror what we see other people doing. So therefore, it's really important that we show people doing the desired behavior. And we need to choose our words carefully. Social distancing went to physical distancing pretty quickly. It got some pushback because we didn't want to social distance because we are social creatures. But we do get it. Maybe we need to be physically distant. We too have been down that road with global warming becoming climate change. So as we come out with new calls to action around behaviors, let's think about the words we're using carefully. We might even need to pass it by some members of the audience first to make sure there's no inherent pushback, no immediate reactance effect to what we're asking. This can just make sure that we don't have to change course partway through. How can we make the behavior easier and more fun to do? Some of the behaviors we're talking about with the coronavirus pandemic are fairly simple. Wash your hands, stay 6 feet away. And even in this case, it's still critically important to always make it easier and more fun. Because even when it seems easy, it's never really that easy for most of us. The example on the left is a great example of using nudges or prompts and reminders, where in the context where someone needs to do that behavior, how can we make it easier? The example on the right, washyourlyrics.com, as we get tired of singing happy birthday to ourselves twice, This website lets you put in any song from any artist you love and what that 20 seconds of hand washing looks like to your favorite lyrics. So it takes the actual behavior and makes it more fun, something that we can even remember to do more regularly. This is the big one. How can we explain some complex concepts in buzzworthy sound bites and graphics? These are two examples from the coronavirus pandemic that have really taken off and are great examples for how we can take something that is fairly complicated, has a lot of science and data behind it, and morph it into something that is easy to understand, quick to understand, and inherently shareable with others. So whether it's flatten the curve or stop the spread, they use great terms and great imagery to communicate something very, very quickly. Some of the tips for doing that is to share some new and different information that folks don't know, add a sense of wow or awe factor with that, plus some steps of what people can do to make a difference. That sort of optimism for change. Both of these say, this is what you can do to make that change. And that's really very key in having these things be impactful and spreadable. Influencers can help share and spread science. This is an example of Steph Curry from the Golden State Warriors, who held a live Instagram interview directly with Dr. Fauci. Now, Steph Curry has a huge audience. Many, many people follow him. And it's not the audience that I think most conservation organizations would have, or even most pandemic organizations would have. So he is bringing the science directly to his audience. He's now the messenger of this change, of these actions. And looking at different influencers than who we normally rely on in the conservation and environmental space may be really important to help spread some of those data points, some of those complex topics to a whole different set of audience segments that we don't normally get to reach directly, and have them spread it to other people. And there's real power in that. And certainly influencers, great if they're celebrities. They don't have to be celebrities. They can also be relatable messengers that are just like the audiences you're trying to reach. So these are just some tips and some thoughts on things we can do that learn from the coronavirus pandemic, that take into consideration where our audiences are now, and thinking about what may come next, so that we can be relevant and heard now, again, while staying as appropriate and empathetic as possible, get ready for what may be coming next, and taking some of these tips and lessons we're learning to make our messages as impactful as possible down the road. Thanks so much for listening. I really appreciate your time. I have more resources at my website, brooktully.com/COVID-19. That includes a much longer webinar on this topic, a Google Doc that I've created with additional resources that I'm updating regularly. And you can go in there and use the comments function and add some of your own resources or thoughts as well as a slide share that you can use, really basically the same slides that I just showed here, and share those with other folks as well. Thanks so much.